All right. So I think I've tested my equipment and I think the volume is sufficient as far as the microphone. And I am going to go ahead and try to do this live video to talk about the recent Star Trek news and see if I can get some interaction from folks. I've actually been getting some more success on my YouTube account in terms of getting more interaction, particularly from fellow Star Trek fans or Trekkies, as I like to call them, or I like to call myself, I should say. And I want to try to expand on that. And this is a big day for Trek because of Star Trek Discovery is in its second season. Now, I'm going to start out by saying that I am not a subscriber to CBS All Access. I have an issue with dealing with another paywall, and I don't really want to do that. So as a result, I haven't gotten into Star Trek Discovery, and I also wasn't very impressed with the pilot, which was actually shown on CBS broadcast. And I had some issues with the pilot. Since then, I have followed a lot of the spoilers for Discovery through blogs and through articles and things like that. But I'm not really going to get into my opinions on Discovery. I'm just going to talk about some Trek news, and then specifically, I'm going to talk about one of the proposed shows that is coming out and some of the issues I have with it. So, with no further delay, let's talk about the latest Star Trek news. So, of course, Discovery Season 2 started today. I am interested in hearing what people's reactions are to the new show, particularly the new season, I should say, and what they think. The big news, of course, is that Pike is back in Discovery. I should say back in Trek. This is going to be him being introduced in Discovery, along with Spock. I don't know how early they're going to introduce Spock, but this is now the third version of Spock, third actor to portray Spock in a relatively short period of time. I am curious what people think of that. I have some issues with that personally, but I am curious what other people think as well. So with Discovery Season 2, I think it's fair to say that there's been a little bit of a shift in the series in what it was and what it was before. Before, I think that there was a lot of talk that they were never going to actually have Spock on the show. It seemed like they didn't want to have any of the characters really from the previous Trek shows, with the possible exception of Spock's father, which a lot of people have mentioned seemed to be a very different version of Spock's father than the one that we are used to. So, of course, that's a big day today, and me not having CBS All Access, I will be reliant on others to give me more information about it. I'm personally very torn about whether to go ahead and check it out, especially with 2 seasons now available of Discovery, so I could make a much more informed judgment on it. But again, I have an issue with the paywall. I use Netflix, but I live in the United States, so I don't get Star Trek Discovery on my Netflix account. And I just don't like the idea of having to deal with another paywall, another pay service. It feels like cable all over again, and that's why I went to Netflix and an internet connection in the first place, was so that I didn't have to do that anymore. So I'm a little disappointed in that. So moving along, in addition to Discovery Season 2, we have had these short treks that we're focusing on various characters within the Star Trek Discovery universe, however you want to view that. I know officially Star Trek Discovery is considered prime by the show producers and by many fans. But the fact of the matter is that it's not really, and I'm going to address that, as I've come across some information recently that many people may not be aware of, because I don't hear it discussed very much when I'm on Twitter and I'm talking to people. I don't hear people discuss it very often as far as why Discovery is so different. I had assumed it was because they just didn't care. The producers of the show just didn't care, and it's actually much more complicated than that. the information that I've recently come across. So you do have short treks, which I don't know what people think of them. I would love to know what people do think of them, if they liked them, if they didn't. Um, it seemed like there wasn't a whole lot of content, from what I understand, of that series. So I don't know if it's going to continue, if they're going to keep doing this or not. Um, but it is what it is. The other show that's in development that has been greenlit is called Lower Decks, and this is going to be the first animated trek since the original animated series. I find that interesting. I also found interesting that it's going to be a comedy. It's basically about, as the kind of the name implies, Lower Decks. It's going to be about the people you generally would never see on a Trek show and the things that they do. Um, as I understand it, the way it was described was we're going to see like the guy that actually fixes the replicators, or the guy that actually makes the replicator work. Which, of course, we have seen that before in a way. I mean, that's what Chief O'Brien did all the time on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. But I guess this is going to have a different kind of emphasis, a different kind of character. So I like the idea of seeing an animated Trek again, but I'm not sure if this particular context is something that I'm totally on board with. Again, I'd be curious what people are thinking of that, especially because it's supposedly that's already been greenlit. That's not a pie in the sky, oh, this may or may not happen kind of thing. Supposedly that's already been greenlit. That's going to happen. The other big one, the one that I'm looking forward to the most, is the Patrick Stewart reboot. That's the only version I have right now to call it. There's, as far as I know, there's not even a tentative title for that new Trek. So, interesting thing with that. This gets into um, why apparently Discovery is so different, and it's a new concern that I have that I haven't heard a lot of people discuss. So I will try to link the video where I got this information in my comments so that people can look at the original video and therefore look at the source information that I'm basically talking about. So I'll try to provide a link. The information that I've come across recently is that the the reason that Discovery is so different from established Trek is because of a legal dispute between Paramount and CBS, um, which were both part of Viacom. So, for people that don't know, CBS and Paramount used to be one company, and they aren't anymore. CBS has all the rights to Star Trek, and so they are the ultimate controllers of Star Trek. But as many of you probably know, the first Star Trek we got post Enterprise was from Paramount. We've got the Kelvin universe. And the reason that we got the Kelvin universe in the first place was because apparently when CBS licensed Star Trek to Paramount, and this is really weird, it's really complicated when you think about it, because remember, all the movies, all of the Star Trek movies have been done by Paramount, okay? But Paramount no longer is a right holder to Star Trek. They are now a licensee. Now, what that means is, in terms of what we're seeing now, what we saw with Kelvin, is that apparently Paramount cannot make anything that's Star Trek that is too much like Star Trek. That's really the best way to explain it. So they have a clause apparently that says that they have to be, I believe, at least 25% different. I have no idea how they determine that, but basically what it says is that CBS has the license to all the previous Star Trek. Okay, so when it comes to the characters, when it comes to their uniforms, their look, all that kind of stuff, they are the ones that have the full access to that material. Paramount no longer does. So when they produce something new, okay, and it's even more complicated talking about the older stuff, but when they're doing new stuff, they have to make it sufficiently different from the original Star Trek in order for them to be in compliance with their license. So if it sounds really complicated, it is, because of their relationship and everything like that. So the result is that we got the Kelvin timeline. Well, this goes even further because apparently CBS All Access partnered with Paramount to make Discovery, and Discovery is made under the same license as the Kelvin movies. So what this means is they have to have certain differences in the look of the uniforms, the bridge, the ships. They can't be identical. They have to have at least a 25% difference, if I remember right, from the source material. And I will try to include a link to the source material when I am finished with my posting this video. So I find that very interesting. I haven't heard it talked about very much. Me personally, I just assumed, quite frankly, that the show creators just didn't care about the Trek continuity at all, and they were just doing their own thing because they didn't care. And it sounds like it's much more complicated than that. And quite frankly, I haven't heard that anybody really talking about that. So I wanted to put that out there, and then also the implications that has for the Patrick Stewart reboot, because what I'm hearing is that the Patrick Stewart reboot is going to have those same rules. So we're going to probably wind up with a prime Trek universe where there is no Vulcan, where there may or may not be a Romulan Empire, probably not. And it's going to be very different, but it's going to be considered prime. So, in a sense, we're going to be erasing the prime universe and replacing it simply because of the licensing agreement. And I'll try to get into that more in another video if people respond to me. Again, I am going to put a link to the video where I got this information from, so you can also see where my source material is coming from and the arguments that they're making. It's really interesting. And then all of this is in the backdrop of the shakeup that's happening at CBS itself. The CEO of CBS was dismissed recently during the whole Me Too scandal. So that's kind of interesting too, because now you're going to have a new board, and they may have a different vision than the previous board did as far as how to treat Star Trek and whether they're okay with this licensing deal or not. Because CBS would still have the option of just making a new Trek series themselves. But apparently, right now, what they're doing is they're using Paramount still to make these shows. And so Paramount has to operate under this license. It's really interesting and it's really weird. But in some ways, it makes sense. In other ways, it doesn't make sense at all. But it is interesting in terms of trying to explain why disco is so different. Something that I was really upset about in terms of the uniforms, in terms of the technology, all that stuff. So we have Discovery season 2. We've got the short treks that have come out. We've got this Lower Decks animated show that's supposed to be coming out. Then we have the Patrick Stewart reboot, and I was telling you about some of the issues that I'm concerned about with that. But the newest announcement actually was on this Section 31 series. And I guess specifically, you could argue whether it's supposed to be a Section 31 series. I know a lot of people think Disco is in of itself a Section 31 series. There's a lot of fan theories about that. But let's talk about this idea they have. Okay, so supposedly another show that's been greenlit is this series that focuses on one of the Disco Mirror Universe characters, who is now in the Prime Universe and has been recruited by Section 31. So the first thing that I think a lot of fans are concerned about is Section 31 in general. A lot of fans seem to really have no problem with Section 31. They seem to really like Section 31, whereas I think it was a kind of bad idea to begin with. I think it's very contrary to the original vision of Gene Roddenberry. And I want to be clear that I don't think everything that Gene Roddenberry ever did or said was good or was appropriate or should have done it. I mean, if any of you know about his pitch for Star Trek Two, which Star Trek Two: Wrath of Khan is my favorite Star Trek thing, movie, anything. His pitch for Star Trek Two sounded awful. Okay, um, I could try to get into that in another video if people are interested in it. But the pitch that I heard, as far as what he wanted to do for Star Trek Two, was terrible. But at the same time, he is the creator of Star Trek, and the one thing that I think makes Star Trek is a positive outlook on the future. That's the main thing. That's the heart of Star Trek. It's all about that positive vision of the future. And if you lose that, that's where I think you start to lose Trek, and that's where a lot of people are arguing about Disco, is because some people really feel it's lost that because it's too cynical. Some people thought that about Kelvin, that Kelvin wasn't really showing that optimistic future either. And I would argue that that's probably true, you know. But with the movies, you can forgive it because movies have to tell a specific story within the parameters of hour and a half, 2 hours. With a series, I think you expect more. I certainly expect more because when you look at even Star Trek movies, they're not all about this positive, optimistic future. Some of them are just telling their own story. Wrath of Khan is my favorite Trek. It's a very contained story that really has nothing to do with that sort of optimistic view of the future or exploration or anything like that. It's actually in a lot of ways kind of cynical because they have the Genesis project and all that kind of stuff, and turns out that Genesis doesn't work right, and it's really more applicable as a weapon than it is as a tool of science or colonization. But I digress. Back to Section 31. So apparently there's this idea of doing the Section 31 series, and as I said, I think this is one thing that really defies the vision of Trek. I can forgive it in Deep Space Nine because in Deep Space Nine, they were obviously trying to make a specific war story, and they were trying to show the desperation of the Federation. The Federation was in a bad place. Federation was losing, and they had to take extreme measures in order to win that conflict. And thus, the sacrifice that the Federation had to make wasn't just in men and women, personnel, materials. It wasn't even just in planets that were attacked or anything like that, loss of resources. It was even the values of the Federation had to be challenged, bent, and maybe even broken in order to win that war. And a lot of that was also about how far would they go. That there was one of Section 31's plans was genocide. They were going to kill all the changelings through a disease. So a lot of problems with Section 31, but at least in Deep Space Nine, it was established that Section 31 was essentially a rogue organization. It was not officially part of the Federation. They got their authority, if you will, basically through what was basically a martial law clause in the Federation Charter that basically said if they had a threat that was going to just, a threat to the existence of the Federation itself, extreme measures could be taken to preserve the Federation. I see it as basically a martial law clause. And so what you have is this very murky picture of what Section 31 was. In fact, on one of the threads I was on, someone made a really good point where they talked about that in Deep Space Nine, you could easily make the argument that Sloan made Section 31 up. That in terms of he knew about the clause in the charter, but that he just made up the organization, that he just created it himself. Now, of course, fans that are really into Star Trek are going to say, well, what about Enterprise? I don't really want to get into Enterprise right now. In fact, I think I would like to do a whole different video on Enterprise because Enterprise really started all this prequel stuff. Enterprise is what started us down this road to what is now Kelvin and Disco. But the interesting thing with Deep Space Nine is that they left Section 31 very murky. It was very much unofficial. It was not the equivalent of the CIA. And that's what I think I see people kind of talk, kind of treating it like it's like, no, Starfleet has its own intelligence organization. They have their own version of the CIA, and they actually do murky bad things too. Just not quite as bad as Section 31 doing genocide. Section 31 is even worse because they're not official at all. The idea of Section 31, at least in Deep Space Nine, is that they have no oversight. They are a fully independent organization, and there's no real equivalent that we even have to Section 31. Like the only equivalent are the ideas, I would say, of something like the deep state, or something like a secret society like the Freemasons, or even Skull and Swords, or even more so the Illuminati, something like that. That's really what Section 31. That's how they're depicted in Deep Space Nine. They're very murky, and you don't know if they're a real thing or not, or if they have a real authorization or not. They leave it intentionally murky, which is good. If you're going to introduce a concept like that and throw a grenade into Trek like that, it's good that you at least keep it very ambiguous as to the nature of the organization. Well, the problem with this series idea, and I've seen the teasers where they show the character flashing her Section 31 badge. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's preposterous, and that is just so against the original vision of Star Trek, in my opinion. I mean, it's just beyond the pale. Um, why would a secret organization have badges to begin with? And lots of people have said that. I just don't understand even that idea of any secret organization doing that. Doesn't make any sense. The CIA doesn't go around badging people either. You know, certainly not in a situation where they're actually trying to gain intelligence or something like that. They don't run around showing badges. I mean, that's really crazy. That's a really crazy, silly concept of a secret organization that does that. But even more so, the problem is that when you do the badges, it really shows an official function, that these guys are somehow official. They are somehow part of the Federation Council, Starfleet Command, that kind of thing, as opposed to just their own kind of rogue element that does what they want and allies them allies themselves with Starfleet and the Federation Council when it's convenient. Um, and so it just seems like they kind of took a situation that was already murky to begin with and not very Trek, if you will, and they're making it much worse. And I can't understand it because a lot some criticism of Disco seems to be that people say that it's too social justice warrior, it's too progressive, for lack of any other term. And I don't see how is Section 31 progressive in any way. I mean, it's Section 31 is really even like worse, theoretically anyway, worse than the KGB and worse than any kind of secret police because they actually have no sanction at all. At least with like something like the Gestapo, the KGB, real life historical examples of secret police, they weren't all that secret. Just like the CIA, they weren't all that secret. They were still an official part of the government. There still was theoretically some kind of oversight, at least at the highest levels of government. Whereas Section 31 basically does whatever it wants. Um, and I don't know, maybe they're going to soften that a little bit, but it really doesn't fit with Trek to begin with, as far as I'm concerned. I think what they're doing is they're taking a problem and actually making it worse. And I really have a problem. I don't understand why people even like the idea, really. So anyway, just to recap, that's the basic Trek news. I'm gonna work some more on these videos. Probably try to do something where I actually edit a little bit, maybe put a little bit more of a appropriate background, so it's not just my random stuff in the back of my head. But if anybody is watching or is interested, I would love to hear your comments on these things. Like I said, Discovery season 2, short treks, lower decks, new Patrick Stewart reboot, Section 31 series, and also what people think about these legal issues with and what you've heard about it as far as CBS and Paramount and what the implications are for Trek. So it looks like I'm just over 25 minutes. I will end the stream now, and I hope to get some feedback.